Okay, let's see if we can watch this thing. So we're going to be watching the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on. So I have good news. I won the lottery. Well, I won half of the lottery. I got 3 numbers out of 6 with a 4x multiplier. That means that I won $20. So just tell me your wish list and I'll make it come true. Sky's the limit, guys. Whatever you want, I got it covered. Until we run out of $20. It said it's live. I'll be a little bummed out if for some reason it's actually working. Let's see if we can't see on YouTube. Senate hearing today. Oh. All right, I guess it's happening. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Coons and Ranking Member Tillis, for the
I
opportunity
guess
to
we're not
testify
going to be able
today.
to view it on their side.
AI can help to unlock creativity, drive innovation, and open up new opportunities for creators and entrepreneurs across the United States. As with any groundbreaking technology, AI raises important questions, and we recognize the depth of concern among creators. While we don't have all the answers, we're committed to an open and constructive dialogue, and we're actively working to address emerging concerns through new technology, standards, and good practices. At Stability AI, our goal is to unlock humanity's potential with AI technology. We develop a range of AI models. These models are essentially software programs that can help a user to create new content. Our flagship model, Stable Diffusion, can take plain language instructions from a user and help to produce a new image. We're also working on research for safe language models that can help to produce new passages of text or software code. AI is a tool that can help to accelerate the creative process. In our written testimony, we shared examples of how Broadway designers, architects, photographers, and researchers are using our models to boost their productivity, experiment with new concepts, or even study new approaches to diagnosing complex medical disorders. We are committed to releasing our models openly with appropriate safeguards. That means we share the underlying software as a public resource. Creators, entrepreneurs, and researchers can customize these models to develop their own AI tools, build their own AI businesses, and find novel applications for AI that best support their work. Importantly, open models are transparent. We can look under the hood to scrutinize the technology for safety, performance, and bias.
Yeah, can we though?
These AI models study vast amounts of data to understand the subtle relationships between words, ideas, and visual or textual features, much like a person visiting an art gallery or library to learn how to draw or how to write. They learn the irreducible facts and structures that make up our systems of communication. And through this process, they develop an adaptable body of knowledge that they can then apply to help produce new and unseen content. In other words, compositions that did not appear in the training data and may not have appeared anywhere else. These models don't rely on a single work in their training data, nor do they store that training data. But instead, they learn by observing recurring patterns over billions of images and trillions of words of text. We believe that developing these models is an acceptable and socially beneficial use of existing content that is permitted by fair use and helps to promote the progress of science and useful arts.
You're going to hell.
Fair use and a culture of open learning is essential to recent developments in AI. It is essential to help make AI useful, safe, unbiased. And it is doubtful that these groundbreaking technologies would be possible without it. The US has established global leadership in AI thanks, in part, to an adaptable and principles-based fair use doctrine that balances creative rights with open innovation. We acknowledge emerging concerns, and these are early days and we don't have all the answers, but we're actively working to address these concerns, as I say, through technology, standards, and good practices. First, we've committed to voluntary opt-outs so that creators can choose if they don't want their online work to be used for AI training. We've received opt-out requests for over 160 million images to date. We're incorporating these into upcoming training. We're helping to develop digital opt-out labels as well that follow the content wherever it goes on the internet. Second, we're implementing features to help users and tech platforms identify AI content. Images generated through our platform can be digitally stamped with metadata and watermarks to indicate if the content was generated with AI.
Can be.
These signals can help ensure that users exercise appropriate care when interacting with AI content and help tech platforms distinguish AI content before amplifying it online. We welcome Adobe's leadership in driving the development of some of these open standards. Third, we've developed layers of mitigations to make it easier to do the right thing with AI and harder to do the wrong thing. Today, we filter data sets for unsafe content. We test and evaluate our models before release. We apply ethical use licenses, disclose known risks, filter content generated through our computing services, and implement new techniques to mitigate bias. As we integrate AI into the digital economy, we believe the community will continue to value human-generated art and perhaps value it at a premium. Smartphones didn't destroy photography, and word processors didn't diminish literature, despite radically transforming the economics of creation. Instead, they gave rise to new demand for services, new markets for content, and new creators. We expect the same will be true of AI, and we welcome an ongoing dialogue with the creative community about the fair deployment of these technologies. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and we welcome your questions.
I don't
Thank you,
believe
Mr.
a word
Brooks.
is said.
Mr. Rao.
Chair Coons, Ranking Member Tillis, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Dana Rao, and I'm General Counsel and, as Senator Coons noted, Chief Trust Officer at Adobe. I'm happy to provide you with the secret certificate you need to get that title if you'd like after the hearing, sure. Since our founding in 1982, Adobe has pioneered transformative technologies in all types of digital creation, from digital documents like PDF to image editing with Photoshop. Our products allow our customers, who range from aspiring artists to wartime photojournalists to advertisers and more, to unleash their creativity, perfect their craft, and power their businesses in a digital world. AI is the latest disruptive technology we've been incorporating into our tools to help creators realize their potential. You've all seen the magic of text-to-image generative AI. Type in the prompt, "cat driving a 1950 sports car through the desert," and in seconds, you'll see multiple variations of a cat on a retro road trip appear before your eyes. We've launched generative AI in our own tools, Adobe Firefly, and it's proved to be wildly popular with our creative professionals and consumers alike. In my written testimony, I explore a comprehensive framework for responsible AI development that includes addressing misinformation, harmful bias, creator rights, and intellectual property. Today, given Adobe's focus on our millions of creative customers and our leadership in AI, I'll focus on how the United States can continue to lead the world in AI development by both supporting the access to data that AI requires and strengthening creator rights. The question of data access is critical for the development of AI because AI is only as powerful and as good as the data on which it is trained.
Exactly.
Like the human brain, AI learns from the information you give it.
Wrong.
In the AI's case, the data it's trained on.
It's not like the
Training on a
human
larger data set can help ensure your results are more accurate because the AI has more facts to learn from. A larger data set will also help the AI avoid perpetuating harmful biases in its results by giving it a wider breadth of experiences from which it can build its understanding of the world.
It doesn't
More data
understand
means
the world.
better answers and fewer biases. Given those technical realities, the United States and governments should support access to data to ensure that AI innovation can flourish accurately and responsibly. However, one of the most important implications of AI's need for data is the impact on copyright and creators' rights. There are many outstanding questions in this space, including whether creating an AI model, which is a software program, from a set of images is a permitted fair use, and whether that analysis changes if the output of that AI model creates an image that is substantially similar to an image on which it is trained. These questions will certainly be addressed by courts and perhaps Congress, and we are prepared to help assist in those discussions. Adobe recognized the potential impact of AI on creators and society, and we've taken several steps. First, we trained our own generative AI tool, Adobe Firefly, only on licensed images from our Adobe Stock collection, which is our stock photography collection, openly licensed content, and works that are in the public domain where the copyright is expired. This approach supports creators and customers by training on a data set that is designed to be commercially safe. In addition, we're advocating for other steps we can all take to strengthen creator rights. First, we believe creators should be able to attach a do not train tag to their work. With industry and government support, we can ensure AI data crawlers will read and respect this tag, giving creators the option to keep their data out of AI training data sets. Second, creators using AI tools want to ensure they can obtain copyright protection over their work in this new era of AI-assisted digital creation. An AI output alone may not receive copyright protection, but we believe the combination of human expression and AI expression will and should.
Don't think so.
Content editing tools should enable creators to obtain a copyright by allowing them to distinguish the AI work from the human work. In my written testimony, I discuss our open standards-based technology, content credentials, which can help enable both of these creator protections. Finally, even though Adobe has trained its AI on permitted work, we understand the concern that an artist can be economically dispossessed by an AI trained on their work that generates art in their style, in the Frank Sinatra example you gave. We believe artists should be protected against this type of economic harm, and we propose Congress establish a new federal anti-impersonation right that would give artists a right to enforce against someone intentionally attempting to impersonate their style or likeness. Holding people accountable who misuse AI tools is a solution we believe goes to the heart of some of the issues our customers have. And this new right would help address that concern.
Interesting.
The United States has led the world through technological transformations in the past, and we have all learned it is important to be proactively responsible about the impact of these technologies. Pairing innovation with responsible innovation will ensure that AI ultimately becomes a transformative and true benefit to our society. Thank you, Chair Coons, Ranking Member Tillis, and members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr.
Mixed
Professor.
bag. Mixed bag.
Chair Coons, Ranking Member Tillis, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. I'm a professor of law in AI, machine learning, and data science at Emory University, where I was hired as part of Emory's AI Humanity initiative. Although we're still a long way from the science fiction version of artificial general intelligence that thinks, feels, and refuses to open the pod bay doors, recent advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence have captured the public's attention and apparently lawmakers' interest. We now have large language models, or LLMs, that can pass the bar exam, carry on a conversation, create new music, and new visual art. Nonetheless, copyright law does not and should not recognize computer systems as authors. Even where an AI produces images, text, or music that is indistinguishable from human-authored works, it makes no sense to think of a machine learning program as the author. The Copyright Act rightly reserves copyright for original works of authorship. As the Supreme Court explained long ago in the 1884 case of Burrow-Giles lithographic, authorship entails original intellectual conception. An AI can't produce a work that reflects its own original intellectual conception because it has none.
Thank you.
Thus, when AI models produce content with little or no human oversight, there is no copyright in those outputs. However, humans using AI as tools of expression may claim authorship if the final form of the work reflects their original intellectual conception in sufficient detail. And I've elaborated in my written submissions how this will depend on the circumstances. Training generative AI on copyrighted works is usually fair use because it falls into the category of non-expressive use.
What usually?
Courts addressing technologies such as reverse engineering, search engines, and plagiarism detection software have held that these non-expressive uses are fair use. These cases reflect copyright's fundamental distinction between protectable original expression and unprotectable facts, ideas, and abstractions. Whether training an LLM is a non-expressive use depends ultimately on the outputs of the model. If an LLM is trained properly and operated with appropriate safeguards, its outputs will not resemble its inputs in a way that would trigger copyright liability. Training such an LLM on copyrighted works would thus be justified under current fair use principles. It's important to understand that generative AI are not designed to copy original expression. One of the most common misconceptions about generative AI is the notion that the training data is somehow copied into the model. Machine learning models are influenced by the data. They would be pretty useless without it, but they typically don't copy the data in any literal sense. So rather than thinking of an LLM as copying the training data like a scribe, in a monastery, it makes more sense to think of it as learning from the training data like a student.
No, fuck off.
If an LLM like GPT-3 is working as intended, it doesn't copy the training data at all. The only copying that takes place is when the training corpus is assembled and pre-processed, and that is what you need a fair use justification for. Whether a generative AI produces truly new content or simply conjures up an infringing cut and paste of works in the training data depends on how it is trained. Accordingly, companies should adopt best practices to reduce the risk of copyright infringement and other related harms.
So I just paused it there for a second just to see if it would pick up where it left off and not skip, because I've had a lot of comments. I've been biting my tongue. I'm going to let this guy finish.
And I've elaborated on some of these best practices in my written submission. Failure to adopt best practices may potentially undermine claims of fair use. Generative AI does not, in my opinion, require a major overhaul of the US copyright system at this time. If Congress is considering new legislation in relation to AI and copyright, that legislation should be targeted at clarifying the application of existing fair use jurisprudence, not overhauling it. Israel, Singapore, and South Korea have recently incorporated fair use into their copyright statutes because these countries recognize that the flexibility of the fair use doctrine gives US companies and US researchers a significant competitive advantage. Several other jurisdictions, most notably Japan, the United Kingdom, and the European Union, have specifically adopted exemptions for text data mining that allow use of copyrighted works as training for machine learning and other purposes.
Right. How is that square remotely? Also, just real quick, he says the data isn't copied. I see absolutely no difference between training an image, which essentially gives it all the mathematical equivalents of all of the weights of an image, and then incorporating that. He's playing it a little fast and loose, and I really got to honestly try to wonder where this guy's bread is buttered. Everything that he's saying is very subjective and a matter of opinion. None of these things have been established in court. This is this one guy's opinion about this, and I don't think that this is absolutely defining in any way, shape, or form.
Copyright law should encourage the developers of generative AI to act responsibly. However, if our laws become overly restrictive, then corporations and researchers will simply move key aspects of technology development overseas to our competitors.
Right, which is the dumbest frickin' thing in the world. Like, oh, well, if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it. What the hell is that? Like, oh, we need to do the kind of scummy thing, otherwise China is going to do it. It's an argument that I've heard a million times before. I don't really abide by that. Look, ingesting copyrighted material into a program that literally, like, I can type in all kinds of copyrighted material, it'll spit me that stuff back out. Now, I'm not advocating for Disney and huge companies here, but the simple fact is that the companies that are going to benefit from this are huge companies, with the exception of, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, of Stable Diffusion, which is open source. There comes my ham sandwich. The only people who are going to make money on this is large companies, and large companies that adopt these tools in order to displace workers. These guys are on some very small picture stuff right here, and you can come at me in any way that you want. I very firmly believe that allowing people who are already obscenely wealthy access to tools which are fed on other people's work in order to function so that they can eliminate those people and increase profits for shareholders and venture capital is absolutely insane. However, very sadly, not completely inconsistent with the world that we're living in, and that is what it is. It's neither here nor there.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Professor. Ms. Ortiz.
Let's go, Carla.
Chairman Coons, Ranking Member Tillis, and esteemed members of the committee, it is an honor to testify before you today about AI and copyright. My name is Carla Ortiz. I am a concept artist, illustrator, and fine artist, and you may not know my name, but you know my work. My paintings have shaped the worlds of blockbuster Marvel films and TV shows, including Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Black Panther, Loki, you know. But specifically, the one I'm most happiest of is that my work helped shape the look of Doctor Strange in the first Doctor Strange movie. I have to brag about that a little bit, sir. I love what I do. I love my craft. Artists train their entire lives to be able to bring the imaginary to life. All of us who engage in this craft love every little bit of it. Through hard work, support of loved ones, and dedication, I have been able to make a good living from my craft via the entertainment industry, an industry that thrives when artists' rights to consent, credit, and compensation are respected. I have never worried about my future as an artist, until now. Generative AI is unlike any other technology that has come before. It is a technology that uniquely consumes and exploits the hard work, creativity, and innovation of others. No other tool is like this. When first researching AI, horrified me. I found that almost the entirety of my work, the work of almost every artist I know, and the work of hundreds of thousands of artists had been taken without our consent, credit, or compensation. These works were stolen and used to train for-profit technologies with data sets that contain billions of image and text data pairs. Through my research, I learned many AI companies gather copyrighted training data by relying on a practice called data laundering. This is where a company outsources data collection to a third party under the pretext of research to then immediately use commercially. I found these companies use vague terms like publicly available data or openly licensed content to disguise their extensive reliance on copyrighted works. No matter what they're saying, these models are illegally trained on copyrighted works. To add even more insult to injury, I found that these for-profit companies were not only permitting users to use our full names to generate imagery, but encouraging it. For example, Polish artist Greg Rutkowski had his name used as a prompt in AI products over 400,000 times. And thus are the lower ends of the estimate. My own name, Carlo Ortiz, has also been used by these companies thousands of times. Never once did I give consent. Never once have I gotten credit. Never once have I gotten compensation. It should come as no surprise that major productions are replacing artists with generative AI. Goldman Sachs estimates that a generative AI will diminish or outright destroy approximately 300 million full-time jobs worldwide. As Ranking Member Tillis mentioned earlier, copyright-reliant industries alone contribute $1.8 trillion of value to the U.S. GDP, accounting for 7.76% of the entire U.S. economy. This is an industry that employs 9.6 million American workers alone. The game plan is simple: to go as fast as possible, to create mesmerizing tales of progress, and to normalize the exploitation of artists as quickly as possible. They hope when we catch our breath, it'll be too late to right the wrongs, and exploiting Americans will become an accepted way of doing things. But that game can't succeed, as we are here now, giving this the urgency it so desperately deserves. Congress should act to ensure what we call the 3 C's and a T: consent, credit, compensation, and transparency. The work of artists like myself were taken without our consent, credit, nor compensation, and then used to compete with us directly in our own markets. An outrageous act that under any other context would immediately be seen as unfair, immoral, and illegal. Senators, there is a fundamental fairness issue here. I'm asking Congress to address this by enacting laws that require these companies to obtain consent, give credit, pay compensation, and be transparent. Thank you.
Preach, sister. If you have a problem with anything that she just said, and you're going to say, suck it, it's fair use, Luddites, you have bigger problems. you should probably see a therapist, or I would recommend just buying a dog. Dogs are great. Maybe a puppy will sort you out. But honestly, that was emotional for me. Like, it's a really big deal. And I can only imagine how nervous she must have been. Like, to speak her words in a compelling manner, and I thought they were. And it just, I'm glad they had her go last, because it really directly undercuts all this babbling nonsense that the Stability AI simp, the Adobe scumbag, Adobe stock. Hey guys, no one in Adobe stock knew their material was going to be trained into their freaking Firefly model. I'm just saying. Anyway, let's keep going. Let's keep going.
Thank you, Ms. Ortiz. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Harleston.
Thank you, Chairman Coons, Ranking Member Tillis, and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here before you today. I'm Jeff Harleston. I'm the General Counsel of Universal Music Group. And what is Universal Music Group? We're the world leader in music-based entertainment. We are home to legendary record labels such as Motown, Def Jam, Island, Blue Note, Capitol, just to name a few. We have a music publishing company that signs songwriters. And we have a music merchandising company as well, and an audio-visual division that produces award-winning documentaries based on music. UMG identifies, develops artists across every musical genre. I think it's fair to note that Frank Sinatra is one of our artists, and I think based on what we didn't hear today, I'm not sure if we'll be pursuing a developing artist out of Delaware named Chris Coons, but maybe we'll get back to that.
I am confident you will not.
All jokes aside, I've been with the company, I've been honored to be with the company for 30 years. And most of the time I've spent as a lawyer, but I've also spent some time leading the Def Jam label and also as the management team of Geffen Records. So I've been on both sides of the business. We have also helped broker deals with digital services, platforms, social media outlets, where all of you can access the music that you love. It's been my life's honor to work with countless talented and creative artists. Their creativity is the soundtrack to our lives. And without the fundamentals of copyright, we might not have ever known them. I'd like to make 4 key points to you today. The first, copyright, artists, and human creativity must be protected. Art and human creativity are central to our identity. Artists and creators have rights. They must be respected. If I leave you with one message today, it is this: AI in the service of artists and creativity can be a very, very good thing. But AI that uses, or worse yet, appropriates the work of these artists and creators and their creative expression, their name, their image, their likeness, their voice, without authorization, without consent, simply is not a good thing. The second point I want to make is that generative AI raises challenging issues in the copyright space. I think you've heard from the other panelists, and they all would agree. We are the stewards at Universal of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of copyrighted creative works from our songwriters and artists, and they've entrusted us to honor, value, and protect them. Today, they are being used to train generative AI systems without authorization. This irresponsible AI is violative of copyright law and completely unnecessary. There is a robust digital marketplace today in which thousands of responsible companies properly obtain the rights they need to operate. There's no reason that the same rules that apply to everyone else should not apply equally to AI companies and AI developers. My third point, AI can be used responsibly to enhance artistic expression. Just like other technologies before, artists can use AI to enhance their art. AI tools have long been used in recording studios for drum tracks, chord progressions, and even creating immersive audio technologies. One of our distributed artists used a generative AI tool to simultaneously release a single in 6 languages in his own voice on the same day. The generative AI tool extended the artist's creative intent and expression with his consent to new markets and fans instantly.
Interesting.
In this case, consent is the key. There is no reason we can't create a legitimate AI marketplace in the service of artists. There's a robust free market for music sampling, synchronization licensing, and deals with new entrants to the digital marketplace, social media companies, and all manner of new technologies. We can do the same thing with AI. And my fourth and final point, to cultivate a lawful, responsible AI marketplace, Congress needs to establish rules that ensure creators are respected and protected. One way to do that is to enact a federal right of publicity. Deep fakes and or unauthorized recordings or visuals of artists generated by AI can lead to consumer confusion, unfair competition against the artist that actually was the original creator, market dilution, and damage to the artist's reputation, potentially irreparably harming their career. An artist's voice is often the most valuable part of their livelihood and public persona, and to steal it, no matter the means, is wrong. A federal right of publicity would clarify and harmonize the protections currently provided at the state level. Visibility into AI training data is also needed. If the data on AI training is not transparent, then the potential for a healthy marketplace will be stymied, as information on infringing content would be largely inaccessible to individual creators. And I might add, based on some of the comments I heard earlier, it would be hard to opt out if you don't know what's been opted in.
Yeah, thank you. Opt out is
Finally,
bullshit.
AI-generated content should be labeled as such. We're committed to protecting our artists and the authenticity of their creative works. As you all know, consumers deserve to know exactly what they're getting. I look forward to the discussion this afternoon, and I thank you for the opportunity to present my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halston. Thank you to all of the witnesses today. We'll begin our first 5-minute round. And I'm going to start by just exploring how we can respect existing copyrighted works, copyright protections, while continuing to safely develop and advance AI technologies. If we run out of time, we'll do a second round. My hunch is there's at least that much interest. Mr. Brooks, if I might just start with you. Generative AI models like those your company creates are trained in no small part on vast quantities of copyrighted content, on data from copyrighted content. Do copyright owners know if their works have been used to train Stability's models?
No.
Is Stability paying rights holders for
No.
that use? Why not, if not? And how would doing so impact your business and your business model?
That's a good question.
Thank you, Senator. So to the first question, models like Stable Diffusion are trained on open data sets or curated subsets of those data sets. So Stable Diffusion.
That's bullshit. 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 The Lion 5B data set has almost 6 billion images. They scrape basically the entire freaking internet. It's about as curated as diarrhea splatter on the inside of an outhouse.
Diffusion, for example, takes a 5 billion image data set. We filter that for content, bias, quality, and then we use a...
We filter it for boobies, but guess what? The boobies are in there.
A 2 billion image subset to train a model like Stable Diffusion. Because it's open, you can go to a website. You can type in the URL of an image. You can type in a name. You can see if that work has appeared in the training data set.
Right, so you have to basically become freaking Batman, the greatest detective alive, in order to, well, at least his idiot brother. You have to become a detective in order to go search out every single piece of artwork.
And then we're working with partners to take those opt-out requests and, as I say, to incorporate them into our own training and development processes. So we do think open data sets are important. They're one part of how we are able to inspect AI for fairness and bias and safety. And so that's, I think, to the first part.
So if I heard you right, if
The answer is no. That was a very long way for him to say, no, they don't know. But if they want to spend a lot of time, they can figure it out. Let's just to be clear, I'm going to paraphrase for fucking Captain AI's at his house and my whatever.
An artist takes the initiative to search your training set. They might be able to identify that a copyrighted work was used and then submit an opt-out request, and you are in the process of facilitating that use. But to my second question, do you pay any of the rights holders?
Just to clarify also, if you do opt out, if you do manage to get your art or your work taken out of the training set, that has absolutely zero effect until they do a complete retraining, right? You can't take it out, at least currently. You can't untrain a model on that. That's why when certain versions of Stable Diffusion came out, people got upset because they were a little lighter. Right? They didn't do the same thing that they did because they actually did remove some of the weights out. They made it harder for you to type in Greg Rakowski. While the art was still in there, it just wasn't delivering the prompt in the same way. So that guy, again, that guy's entire answer was just a whole big bunch of air just moving in nonsense. I dislike this guy.
As I say, Senator, this is 2 billion images, a large amount of content.
6 billion.
A lot of it, all kinds of content.
Paid for nothing.
Take language models, for example. It's not just books, it's snippets of text.
Shut the fuck up. It's paid for nothing.
As I say, to make that workable, we believe, that it is important to have that diversity, to have that scale.
So that's a no.
That's how we make these models safe. It's how we make them effective.
Lying.
And so we collect it, as I say, from online data. What I will say is that the data sets that we use, like that 5 billion image data set I mentioned, they respect protocols like robots.txt. So robots.txt is a digital standard that basically says, I want my website to be available for ancillary purposes such as...
The Lion 5B dataset was compiled, and these people in Germany started compiling this so long before this entire issue came complex that you got to just understand that everything that Mr. AI is saying over here is doublespeak. Just view everything that he says through that lens, and I won't need to say another word about it.
Search engine indexing, and so the data set that was compiled respected that robots.txt signal, and then on top of that, as I say, we have the opt-out facility that we've implemented.
So that's a no. What the good senator asked him is, have you paid anybody? And this guy, for about a minute and a half, went in a circular bunch of nonsense. Emad has trained this clown very well. You're earning your paycheck, but you're going to hell.
Thank you, Mr. Rao. It's my understanding that Adobe is taking a distinctly different approach. Your generative AI model, Firefly, was only trained on licensed data. Were there any downsides economically to that decision? Is your model less robust, or has it...
They didn't pay anybody. When they say licensed, and I can't wait to hear what this guy says. I think I heard this guy, Rao, talk on the big Adobe Firefly full court press that they had at the release of those products. They didn't pay anyone whose work is on Adobe stock. Not a single one of them got a penny from Adobe to train their model. So I can't wait to hear what this guy says, but I'm telling you, it's going to be a load of bullshit. Let's go.
Had any impact on its performance, and how would you compare these two approaches in terms of the incorporation of opt-out and licensed?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So as I mentioned in the opening remarks, Adobe Firefly, our generative AI tool, was trained on our stock photography collection, which are all licensed assets.
Which nobody knew who has their stuff up there. Nobody was told.
With the contributors. And that's actually the only data set used in the version that you can use on Adobe Firefly on the web. We think about the quality of this, and when we think about the quality to your question, we had to put a lot of image science behind that to make sure it was up to the level we require, because we didn't have the most expensive version of that data set. So we had to put more computer science behind it to make it have the higher quality we needed. As we go,
there is something true to what this guy's saying right now. When you use Adobe Firefly, when you just type in a prompt, what it gives you is much less robust than something like Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, which basically vacuums up the entire contents of everybody's everything, and that does show. Now, without getting it, you can check my other video on Adobe Firefly. There is some element to what he's saying. It's far more complex than that, but if the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, you can see that the generative results of Adobe Firefly are way less robust, or what's the word? I don't want to use the wrong term. Like they're less sort of articulated professionally and concisely. It's a little messier, and if it was done properly, ethically, like that would be fine. Anyway,
Go forward, we're looking at whether or not there are other areas where we need to supplement that data set. And then for those, we refer to as openly licensed content, or places where the copyright has expired. Openly licensed to us means images that come from the rights holders who have licensed it without restriction. So very similar to what we're talking about in the licensed content. This is also what we call commercially safe.
My sense.
that's really big. They should just pay people, great artists, to have their work put in there. I mean, if they're talking about public domain, that's one thing. I'm all for using public domain to train these models. That was a little vague.
Mr. Brooks, is Stability's trying to honor something like 160 million opt-out requests in training your next model.
If 160 million people tried to get their stuff out of your internet vacuum hose, that is very telling.
Mr. Rao, Mr. Brooks, this will be my last question, then I'll turn to Senator Tillis. Should Congress be working to ensure that creatives can opt out of having their works used to train AI models? How would you best do that?
He's asking the wrong question. No, I'm going to go ahead and say, so far, Mr. Coons, he's asking good questions, but it's not about ensuring opt-out. It's establishing an opt-in only sort of system. That's it. It's not rocket science. It's either opt-in or get the F out.
Briefly.
So we have this technology we refer to as content credentials in my opening remarks, and what that does, it's a metadata that goes along with any content. So if you're in Photoshop right now, you could say, I want content credentials to be associated with this image. As part of that, you can choose to say, I want it not to be trained on a do not train tag. That gets associated with the image, and it goes wherever the content goes.
It's very important to notice, or to take note, that if you attach any sort of do not train meta tag on a piece of artwork's metadata, it's entirely at the discretion of the people scraping, compiling a data set, and then subsequently you are going to train that model if they want to honor that. It's not a poison pill. It's not a mission impossible. This piece of art will self-destruct. It is very much at the will of the people who are doing the scraping. So is it meaningless? A little bit. Does it give you potentially some sort of legal recourse if you can prove that you had this, and then some, scraper people take your thing and then it's trained into a model against your will? I mean, theoretically down the road that could be a thing, but you're going to have to take these people to court. How is that really that helpful? So the content credentials thing that they're talking about, in addition to making file sizes bigger, and it's kind of convoluted, we messed around with it a little bit. Look, it's opt-in or it's nothing.
Goes. So we do think the technology is there and available, and we're talking to other companies, including Stability, about this as an approach to honor that tag, so people, when they're crawling it, can see the tag and choose not to train upon it.
Should we require that?
And I do think that there's an opportunity for Congress to mandate the carrying of a tag like that, a credential like that, wherever the content goes. Right now, it's a voluntary decision to choose to do that.
Should we require that?
There's some very interesting precedent internationally for this. The European Union has introduced certain kinds of text and data mining exceptions, and part of that is to say that you can use this for commercial, non-commercial purposes. There is an opt-out requirement, but the opt-out has to be machine readable, as I say, as a matter of practicality when you're dealing with trillions of words of content, for example, or billions of images in this case. the machine readability is important, and that's where these tags become an important part of how to implement it in practice.
We'll keep exploring this further. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to have Senator Blackburn go, and then I'll follow Senator Hirono.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Tillis. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for the hearing today. It's so appropriate that we have this. I'm from Tennessee. We have thousands of artists and songwriters and musicians, and we have actors and actresses, we have authors and publishers, and everywhere I go, people are talking about the impact of AI to the positive or the negative. You know, you look at healthcare, you look at logistics, you look at autos, you look at entertainment, and there are pros and cons. But the one point of agreement is you got to do something about this so that it is going to be fair and it's going to be level. Mr. Harleston, I want to come to you right off the bat because you mentioned the NIL issue, which I think is an imperative for artists to be able to own that. And you also mentioned the right of publicity laws. And of course, those are state level laws. And as you rightly said, we don't have a federally preemptive right to publicity law. And I think the dust up, a lot of people came to realize this over Drake and the Weeknd and Heart on the Sleeve. And this is something that does have to be addressed. So for the record, give us about 30 seconds, and then you guys see your capable team behind you. You can submit something longer in writing if you'd like on the reason state-level publicity laws are not enough.
In 30 seconds. State level right of publicity laws are inconsistent from state to state. A federal right of publicity that really elevates right of publicity to an intellectual property is critically important to protect.
Okay, I'm going to help you out with this. A federally preemptive right to publicity law would provide more of that constitutional guarantee to her works that Ms. Ortiz has mentioned.
Absolutely.
So, all right, and
we will follow up with you, Senator.
Yeah, excellent. I think something in writing would be very helpful there. Now, I think it was very appropriate that you had Spotify and Apple Music take down Heart on My Sleeve. Important to do. And talk about the role that the streaming platforms should play. Should they be the arbiter when it comes to dealing with this generative AI content?
Every level.
The streaming platforms, we acknowledge that they're in a challenging position, but certainly in some instances when it's clear that the content that's been submitted to them for distribution.
So a knowing and willingness standard would be nice.
That would be very nice, yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm helping you out there.
You're doing
Thanks
great.
for being here. Okay, Professor Sachs, want to come to you. This spring, the Supreme Court issued what I thought was a very appropriate decision in Warhol versus Goldsmith. And I was very pleased to see them come down on the side of artists. I filed an amicus brief in this case arguing for strong fair use protections for creators. Now, we've been through this thing in the music industry where fair use became a fairly useful way to steal my property. And artists don't want to go through that again. Right, Ms. Ortiz?
This woman. Yo, shout out Miss Blackburn. I feel like she spends a lot of time in Nashville hanging out with the musicians and the artists.
It didn't work the way it was supposed to. And I would like for you to talk for a moment. Should AI, unlicensed AI, ingestion of copyrighted works be considered fair use when the output of AI replaces or competes with the human-generated work. Now, Ms. Ortiz has laid this out fairly well in her comments, and the Supreme Court has sided with the artist in Warhol versus Goldsmith. But this fair use standard comes into play every time we talk about our fabulous creative community and keeping them compensated. So the floor is yours.
Senator Blackburn, commercial replacement should not be the test. The test should be exactly what the Supreme Court said in the Andy Warhol case. The question is this significantly transformative? What that means in relation to training AI models is, does the output of the model bear too much resemblance to the inputs?
The fourth aspect of the fair use law basically speaks specifically about competing with the original product. So this guy, I'm getting heavy Shad vibes from this dude. I'm not really in love with the sounds that are pouring out of his mouth. It's not compelling, and I'm just not in agreement.
Now that's a different question to, is it competing with the inputs? Could it be used as a commercial substitute? If you look at some of the old cases on reverse engineering software, companies were allowed to crack open software, find the secret keys to interoperability, and build new competing products that did not contain any copyrightable expression, and the court said that that was fair use. So I think on current law, the answer is no. Potential substitution in terms of a competing product is not the test. The test is, are you taking an inappropriate amount of an artist's original expression?
Well, my time has expired.
You're definitely taking an inappropriate amount of an artist's original expression. There has never been anything like AI, period. Strip all the copyrighted work and artist work out of it, and then whatever you got left, go to town. Have a blast. Let's all prompt ourselves into the frickin' madhouse.
Thank you for that. We just don't want it to become a fairly useful way to steal an artist's product. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Shout
Senator
out.
Blackburn, and thank you for the
You're
passionate
awesome.
engagement you've always brought to these issues on behalf of the creative community.
Good job, Asian photographer. Crouching down there real low. I used to do that. Good job. Good job to have. She's wearing all black like she should. Good spy work there. Keeping it low. Keeping it low.
Senator Haruna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harleston, whenever the idea of negotiating licenses is raised, people express concerns about how complex it would be and how AI platform developers could never possibly negotiate with all rights holders. But in the music context, at least, you have a lot of experience negotiating rights. Could you tell us a little bit about your industry's history of negotiating rights with digital music services and lessons that history could teach us for whether rights negotiations would be possible with AI platforms?
Thank you, Senator. As you referenced, we've had a long history with the transition of our business from a physical business to a digital business, and having to encounter digital platforms that were very quickly adapted by consumers and had lots of our content on there. Mm-hmm. What we found was ingenuity does play a role. It's not easy, but we were able to identify or find ways to identify our copyrights, to work out licensing schemes that allowed the platforms to be able to carry and distribute the music and in a commercial environment that was positive for them, while at the same time allowing the artists to be properly compensated.
So basically, it can be done, the whole line from the AI companies where it's just impossible. We have to just take the data because otherwise it'd just be too difficult. There's just so much stuff out there. What are we, like magicians? It's bullshit. It's just bullshit.
And this is, in the music side, we have two sets of rights, which makes it even more complicated. But we've done great work over the years to develop systems that allow identifying not only the sound recording but also the underlying composition. So it could be done. But what it needs What we would need is we need help to make sure that everyone understands that there are rights that are affected and that the activity that is happening now is violative. And once they understand that what they're doing is violative, that brings them to the table so we can negotiate a deal.
Yeah.
I note that in your testimony you said that consent is the key. So is your position that every artist's work, before it can be used to train AI models, that the company that's wanting to use that information has got to get the consent
Yes.
of the originator?
Yes.
In a very short answer, yes.
Yes.
You think that we are able to do this knowing that that these platforms incorporate billions and billions of information to train their AI models?
What the fuck?
Understanding that, but it absolutely could be done as the digital platforms that exist today, the licensed platforms ingest millions and millions of songs every week. So it's not a problem in that respect. There's metadata we could license. We could absolutely do that, but there has to be an initiative on the side of the companies to reach out.
So, Mr. Ortiz, Mr. Brooks, rather, sorry. What I heard you say in response to the chairman's question is that for all of the data that you input into your model, you do not get the consent of the artist or originator. Is that correct, Mr. Brooks?
So Senator, we believe that, yes, if that image data is out on the internet and robots.txt says it can be subject to aggregated data collection, and if it's not subject to an opt-out request in our upcoming models, then certainly we will use those images, potentially use those images.
You didn't put a sign outside of your house that said, "Do not break in and rob me," so we're totally allowed to just break in and take your stuff. However, if you want to submit an opt-out request after we've robbed your house, we will process it in due time. Do you listen to, is this guy listening to the fucking words that are coming out of his mouth?
If it passes our filters.
So basically, you don't pay for the data that you put into your to train your models.
For the base, the kind of initial training or teaching of these models with those billions of images, there is no arrangement in place.
And there's no arrangement for any other part of it either. You've also created Dream Booth, which allows users in their mom's basement, or my mom's basement in this particular case, I could just go ahead and jack whatever the hell I want off the internet and use that and train and basically steal someone's artistic identity, eh, mate? It's good times indeed. I'm having a great time.
So you have Ms. Ortiz who says that is wrong.
Yeah, it's wrong.
Is that correct, Ms. Ortiz?
100%, Senator.
So do you know if, well, I think you mentioned that your work has been used to train AI models, and you have gotten not 1 cent for that use.
I have never been asked. I have never been credited. I have never been compensated 1 penny. And that's for the use of almost the entirety of my work, both personal and commercial, Senator.
So if you were to allow your works to be used to train, do you think that you would negotiate, if there was a law that required compensation, then that compensation negotiation should be left to you and entities such as Mr. Brooks's?
Personally, I love what I do, so I wouldn't outsource it to an AI, but that's not a choice for me to make, and it's all about that. It's about being able to have that choice, and artists don't have that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, I would have answered the same way. The simple fact is there would be no negotiation because you're not getting it. But there's no choice here. They just take it, and then we're just going to make up a bunch of bullshit after the fact.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually inspired by one of the opening statements, so I went in and generated a cat driving a 1960 Corvette with a surfboard in it. And produced that picture. It actually gave me 4 options. This one I found the most interesting. But it raised a question that I wanted to ask you, Mr. Brooks. How, if an artist looked at that and said, that is in part developed by that 60s Corvette, in South Beach. How does that artist then go about saying, I'm trying to get an understanding of your current opt-out policy? And one of the issues that we've had here, and not completely related, but we have a notice and take down or notice and stay down discussion in the past around creative works. So I was just trying to understand, and I think it's going to be a lengthy answer, and then if I talk to a creative, it's going to be a lengthy answer. But for the record, it would be very helpful to me for your specific platform to understand how that opt-out process works. I think I heard right that you could embed within the works certain things that already create an opt-out, or that work shouldn't be used. But I want to drill down. We don't have time to do that now. In a twist of irony, I was wondering if any of the witnesses would suggest any creative works by other governmental bodies that we should steal and use as a baseline. In other words, what good policy seems to be being discussed or passed, and what particularly problematic at either end of the spectrum, because I'm sympathetic to the issues at both ends of the spectrum on this argument. So maybe we start with you, Professor. Are you aware of any Western democracy states? I'm not particularly interested in what China's doing, because whatever they agree to, they're going to rip off anyway. But any best practices that we should look out there, or bad practices or trends that we should avoid or be concerned with as we move forward?
I think that the European Union's approach, where they have different rules for commercial and non-commercial use, and opt-outs have to be respected for commercial uses of the text mining in Article 4 of the DSM, has something to recommend it. By the same token, I would note opt-outs do not apply to researchers working at proper research institutions in the EU, nor do contractual overrides, which is a position that I can't see Congress adopting, but it's certainly something to look at. That's really it.
Anyone else briefly could add what? Ms. Ortiz, I should also add, I've seen all your works, and it's been since 11 o'clock last night that I was talking about Guardians of the Galaxy with my colleagues as we were coming back from Vilnius.
It was a really fun project to work on, Senator, so thank you. So what the artist community have suggested is that models be built starting from scratch via public domain only works. That's work that belongs to everyone. Any expansion upon that to be done via licensing. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Current opt-out measures are inefficient. For starters, machine learning models, once they are trained on data, they cannot forget. And unlearning procedures are just dead on the water right now. And this is not according to me. I'm an artist. I have no idea on this. This is according to machine learning experts in the field. Secondly, safety filters, like, for example, prompt, filters, are so easily bypassed by users. So unfortunately, when companies say, hey, opt out, there's no real way to do that. But even further, what happens if someone doesn't know how to write a robot.txt? Like, how does a person who may not know the language, may not know the internet, may not even know that their work is in there, recognize that, they need to opt out? This is why my community in particular has suggested over and over, opt-in should be the key in order to base the foundations of consent, credit, and compensation.
And Mr. Brooks, I can understand the challenges with opt-in versus opt-out in terms of the task that you would have ahead of you. But what's your view of the concerns that creatives have expressed in this light, and the current opt-out process that you all have in place, or procedures, which I'd like to get information for the record?
Thank you, Ranking Member. Look, I'll say at the start that we do need to think through what the future of the digital economy looks like. What do incentives look like? How do we make these technologies a win-win for everyone involved? These are very early days from our perspective. We don't have all the answers, but we are working to think through what that looks like.
I'm going to stick around for a second round, so we'll get a little bit deeper into that, but I want to defer to my colleague from California.
Thank you
Senator
for cutting
Tillis.
that prick
Senator
off.
Thank
you.
Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony and participation today.
I'm getting the sense that they all think that the stability guy is a weasel. They're listening to him. Look, these are politicians. These are the masters of the verbal dance and game recognize game, or in this case, lack thereof. And that's why I'm glad Mr. Tillis just cut this guy off, because this guy is just completely full of shit,
Speaking of California, I can't help but observe that California is very well represented on this panel. Not only a point of pride for me as a senator from California, but it's frankly not a surprise since we are the creative and tech hub of the nation. Now, generative AI tools, as we've been talking about, present remarkable opportunities and challenges for the creative community and our broader society. And I couldn't help but observe that in reviewing the testimony from each of you, I noted the common goal of seeking to leverage and develop AI tools to complement and encourage human creativity and artistry, while also respecting the rights and dignity of the original creators. So it's a tall order, a delicate balancing act in many ways, but this seems to be the shared objective here. So I want to thank you again for participating in this hearing as we're working to determine what role we play in fostering the development of AI in a manner that is a net positive for innovation and creativity. My first question, and I'll keep it brief because it's sort of piggybacking on Senator Hirono's raised it, Senator Tillis is just trying to expand upon it, and it's directed at Mr. Brooks. This whole opt-in, opt-out, we can talk about what the process is, whether it's easy, clear, or not for artists. And I don't completely agree with you that we're in an early stage because it's happening fast.
Thank you. The early stage was before this all came out. Thank you, Mr. Padilla.
Tell me how it's possible, explain how it works to have a system unlearn inputs that have already been taken if you get this after.
They have to retrain the entire model from scratch.
The fact opt out from an artist. It's happening now. While you're trying to think what it means long term, it's happening now. So how does it work? Not just process, checking a box, filling out a form, but technically.
Thank you, Senator. So just in terms of that collection piece, I just want to make it clear that today it is very much a kind of work in process framework.
Oh my God. Get this guy out of the room, man.
You can go to this website, you can indicate you want to opt out. We will take those opt-out requests as they come in. But as we were talking about before, it's important that eventually there is a standardized kind of metadata that just attaches to these works as they go out into the wild. And as I say, that is what the EU is requiring, and I think there'll be a lot of standards development in that space, again, with firms like Adobe and others. In terms of what then happens, as I say, we filter that training data for a few reasons. We take out unsafe content. We adjust for issues like bias.
Just to be very clear, if nobody knows this, the #1 tool for generating illicit child P, which is P is short for a very bad word, creating completely mind-blowingly fucked up images of children is the tool that's made by the company that this absolute gas bag of a whatever the hell this guy is, well, he's a paid liar, that company makes it. He's talking about filtering. A little late for that. Literally. Way late. Early stages? Okay, I'm just going to relax. Okay? Just to be clear, the company that he works for, they create the #1 AI child pornography generator in the history of existence.
Bias, to correct for bias. And then in addition to that, we start to incorporate, as I say, the opt-out requests. Sometimes some of the models we release are retrained from scratch with new data sets. Again, they take into account the lessons learned through previous development, both as an organization, as a company, and potentially technical things that we've learned as well in that process. Some of the models that are released are just fine-tuned variations of the model. And so those ones may have the same kind of basic knowledge from that original training process, and there's just been some additional training to correct for certain behaviors or improve performance in specific tasks. So in terms of the future of this space, there is a lot of work being done on unlearning in general. How do you interpret the relationship between training and the data in training and the performance of the model? How do you potentially adjust for that in different ways?
Wipe it out and start over. Ta-da!
But as I say, at this stage, we treat it as a process of incorporating those opt-out requests, retraining, and then releasing a new model trained on that new data set.
I hear you. And I just want to level set a little bit, not just out of the concern for the artists, but knowing that unless you're getting 1, 2, 3 inputs a day, which may be small enough to keep your arms around, I doubt that's the case. As we're getting into the hundreds and thousands of inputs per day to go in and relearn, unlearn, and comply with any
yeah, the retraining happens so seldomly. I can only think of maybe once or twice that it's actually happened.
consent or opt-out, it gets overwhelming and unfeasible real quick. And that's happening.
Yeah, in order to completely retrain a model, it requires massive amounts of compute power, compute time, and forget about power generation. I mean, I don't want to get into some like environmental shit here, but it's environmental shit. Like, it's on that level.
Happening now. I also wanted to follow up on a subject matter that I think Senator Coons touched on earlier. We know that generative AI models need to be fed large data sets to learn how to generate images based on user prompts, just like Senator Tillis did. And by the way, that looked much more like Pacific Coast Highway than South Beach. Now, AI, this is now talking to folks back home, can only understand what it is taught, making it critical that for AI companies to train their models with data that captures the full range of the human experience. We want to be inclusive and diverse if we're going to be accurate.
Right, that's assumed that they absolutely must do that. Why does it have to be that? Why can't this march go? Why can't we just slow the F down? You don't have to go from 0 to the moon overnight. Like, that's not how it works.
In representing our users, representing the diverse backgrounds of all users. Now, Mr. Rao, you've explained how Adobe's Firefly seeks to avoid copyright infringement by being trained on only licensed Adobe stock images, openly licensed content, and public domain content. So how do you reconcile both? You want to be as inclusive as possible, which means as much data input as possible, but to avoid the copyright infringement, you're being selective in those inputs. That diversity of input is important, I think, for the diversity of output. So how do you reconcile?
Yeah, it's definitely a tension in the system, right? The more data you have, the less bias you'll see. So it's great to have more data. But when you set the expectations that we had for ourselves of trying to design a model that was going to be commercially safe, we took on the challenge of saying, can we also do that and minimize harmful bias? And the way we did that, we have an AI ethics team. We started that 4 years ago. And one of the key things they did when we were developing Adobe Firefly was not only do we have the data set and we understand what that is, we also did a lot of testing on it. We have a series of prompts, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prompts we were testing against it to see what the distribution of the model, is there going to be a bias? If you type in lawyer, you're only going to get men or white men, and what does that mean, and how do you change that? And you can either change it by adding more data, making it more diverse, and so that means you have to go ethically source more data to diversify the data set, or you can add filters on top of the data set to force a distribution of what you expect to see if you're typing in certain search terms and make sure the bias is removed. So you can either do it by adding more data, or you can do it through adding filters on top of the model itself to ensure that you're going to get the right result.
And if you input senator, what comes out?
An amazingly handsome man and woman, just very...
Just shut up.
Very intellectual.
Men and women.
Men and women.
We're really not talking about AI bias. That's something completely unrelated. It's very important, don't get me wrong, but that's real. We're talking about copyright, not bias. This guy just spent 45 seconds talking about bias.
Colors across the spectrum.
Across the spectrum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The first time we did
I'm sure it doesn't, not every color across the spectrum.
lawyer, though, we only had white men, and as general counsel, I was like, there should be some people who look like me as well.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Klobuchar.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I was glad to be here for all your testimony, and thank you for that. I guess I'll start with you, Mr. Harleston. Approximately, I know you talked about this a bit with some of the other senators, Senator Blackburn, approximately half of the states have laws that give individuals control over the use of their name, image, and voice, but in the other half of the country, someone who was harmed by a fake recording purporting to be them has little recourse. In your testimony, you talk about new laws and how they could protect musicians' names, likenesses, and voices, the right of publicity, I think you called it. Can you talk about why creating this is important in the face of emerging AI, and how have statutes in states that have these protections helped artists?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. It is critical in this environment when we're talking about the creative expression that the artist has made, that the right of publicity also be extended at the federal level. There is inconsistency, but more importantly, the preemptive element of it is critical. Raising it to the level of an intellectual property is also critical. What we've seen, and this is really in the area of deep fakes, where you've seen, I think Ms. Ortiz referenced how many times her name was listed. We're finding with our artists, particularly the ones that are most established, that their names are daily hundreds of thousands of posts with their names, and also there's sometimes images that are used as well. So it's critical to have this right. To protect the artists and their use. And if I could just say one thing on the, I know this is not your question, but I have to say it.
There we go.
Because it's killing me.
I'll just add it to my time.
All right, thank you. It's on the opt-in, opt-out, there's an element beyond commerciality, and I want to make sure everyone understands. As Ms. Ortiz did reference it about she probably wouldn't want a license to an AI, and there we have artists that don't want a license to streaming services. So it's not always about the commerciality. Some artists just don't want their art distributed in certain ways. And the Beatles didn't come on to streaming platforms till about 7, 8 years ago. That was a decision that was very important to them. So I want to add that into the conversation. I know that wasn't your question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, very good. And so what do you see as the obligations of social media platforms on this?
With respect to AI? Oh, a great, fantastic question. We believe that the social media platforms absolutely have an obligation. I will say this, that we could help them by giving them a hook beyond copyright in terms of being able to take down some of the deep fakes.
Yeah.
We've had challenges with some of the platforms in this.
Right, exactly. And I think we're seeing the same thing. I guess I would turn to you, Mr. Brooks. You talked about advocating for creative ways to help people identify AI-created content. When we talk about deep fakes, we're already seeing this with political ads and not even paid ads, just videos that are put out there. There was one of my colleagues, Senator Warren, that was just total lie, that saying that, acting like it was her, that she was saying people from one party shouldn't be able to vote. We've seen it in the Republican presidential primary. A number of us on a bipartisan basis are working on this. I chair the Rules Committee, so this is kind of my other hat. Do you agree that without tools for people to determine whether an image or video is generated by AI, that would pose a risk to our free and fair elections if you can't tell if the candidate you're seeing is the candidate or not?
I've been saying this for forever. One of the best ways that we're going to get politicians to pay attention to this is to just generate tons of deep fakes of them. And fortunately, the other politicians who are in an adversarial race or whatever with politician X, Y, or Z absolutely are already doing this for us. So just the fact, I'm glad to hear Senator Klobuchar here say, yes, we are very well aware of this. This is already affecting us. It's basically some grimy nonsense, and that's a super, super good thing.
No, thank you, Senator. Look, we absolutely believe that these transparency initiatives, like CAI with Adobe, are a really important part of how we make the information ecosystem more robust. This isn't just an AI problem or a social media problem. It's going to require everyone, and it's going to require accountability right across that ecosystem. But what we think is, we have in place things like metadata, things like watermarking for content. They're just some more of the signals that social media platforms can use to decide whether they're going to amplify certain content. And that's
Yes, and we've got this Real Political Advertisement Act with Senator Booker and Senator Bennett. There's a version initially that was also introduced in the House, and so that's one solution, but we're also going to have to look at, I would say, banning some of this content, because even a label or a watermark, if it's not going to help the artist or the candidate if everyone thinks it's them and it's not, and then at the end it says generated by AI.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a great question, and a really important one, I think, Senator, because there's a few things in there. I think there's the question of the use of likeness, particularly for improper purposes, where you're implying that there's some kind of endorsement or affiliation between a particular person and a particular work or idea. That is different, I think, to the use of the kind of free experimentation with style and some of these other issues that tend to get lumped together in AI outputs.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of these scenarios that you're talking about, there is this kind of improper use. You're implying that someone endorses or embraces a cause or a work that they're not affiliated with, and there needs to be clear rules around how likeness is used in that context, whether through right of publicity or through some of the bespoke deepfake legislation.
Okay, last, Mr. Rao. Our recent study, and I know you've worked on this democracy issue, which I truly appreciate, a recent study by Northwestern predicted that 1/3 of the U.S. newspapers that existed roughly 2 decades ago will be gone by 2025. The bill that Senator Kennedy and I have, the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, would allow local news organizations to negotiate with online platforms, including generative AI platforms. This bill passed through this committee now twice. Could you describe how Adobe approaches this issue? And in your experience, is it possible to train sophisticated generative AI models without using copyrighted materials, absent consent?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. Our current model that is out there is trained using the licensed content that I had mentioned before, and other content that has no restrictions on it, and it comes from
Not opted in.
the right holders directly. So we definitely think it is possible. We've done it. It's out there on our website.
Right holders directly without them knowing. They didn't know.
And it's also in Photoshop, and people love it. The creative professionals are using that AI. It makes their day easy. It
No, they're not.
lets them start their creative work in just one click, and then they finish it in the tool.
No, we're not.
So it's really revolutionized how we think about things in terms of how we acquire data sets. We have a group inside Adobe who that's their job. Their job is to think about, where do we need to go next? Do we need to get to different media types? Are we missing some sort of subject matter for our AI to be more accurate? That was a question we had before. We think about that content. Maybe there's a newspaper that you mentioned that has the kind of content we need. We go approach that organization and say, look, we need to license that content in to make sure our AI is more accurate. So we have a team that thinks about this, sources it, and brings it in.
And in the absence of that, I mean, what impacts do you anticipate this could have on local journalism if there's no rules of the road put in place?
Yeah, I think that, both on the authenticity side and on this side, if people are able to, create images and these newspapers are not able to get, the ability to license the work they're doing, it could certainly have a negative impact to them. On the authenticity side, the reason why so many media companies have joined the Content Authenticity Initiative, like AP, Reuters, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, is because they know that when they're showing images, they need to be able to show that they're actually true. Mm-hmm. They need to be able to prove that it happened. If people stop believing that any of the digital images they're seeing are real, then they're going to stop consuming newspapers. They're going to stop consuming that content because they're not going to believe it. So you have to give those local newspapers a way to prove what they're showing is
Right.
true, so people will still consume it.
Of course, there's a lot less famous newspapers, including some very small ones in my state that just you might not mention, right? And so I think that's part of it, is that the Ms. Ortizes of this story need to be able to have some kind of power to be able to protect their content too, because they don't have a general counsel and they're not going to be able to, on their own, start some major lawsuit. And so I think that's how we have to think about that too, as we look at all of this.
And that's why I would say again that when we designed the Firefly, we designed it that way, right? To be commercially safe first, right? Making sure that we built the model the way.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm saying it sort of rhetorically to the world and to everyone that needs to get this done, as opposed to you, Mr. Rao. So thank you
so much.
All right, appreciate it. And
Thank you,
you, both of you, for your continual bipartisan work and taking on this very important issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. We're going to do a last round of questioning. We may be joined by other colleagues, but we are also in the middle of a vote. So my hunch is we will resolve this in 10 to 15 minutes at the most, if I might. I'm interested in pursuing the question of a federal statutory right of publicity, and to me the core issue really is what's the remedy. Often preemption is motivated by a desire for there to be consistency, the elevation in terms of process and access to justice and potential remedies that comes with a federal right as opposed to a state right. But Professor, if I could start with you, you testified earlier in response to a question from Senator Blackburn that commercial replacement is not the appropriate test under current fair use law in the United States. Should we adopt a federal right of publicity with commercial replacement as the test or a part of the test, and how would that play out? What other remedy might you suggest under a new federal right of publicity?
Senator, thank you for that question, because I was quite alarmed by some of the discourse here about right of publicity. I think
I'm alarmed regularly by discourse, Senator.
As well as thinking about publicity rights for well-known artists, musicians, etc., Congress should be thinking about the right of publicity of ordinary people, people who are anonymous, people who have no commercially valuable reputation. All of us deserve to be protected from deepfakes and synthetic reproductions of our name, image, and likeness, regardless of whether we're a famous politician or a famous artist or just an anonymous law professor. So I think...
How would you focus the remedy in order to make that effective?
Senator, in terms of remedy, I think that right of publicity statutes have traditionally had injunctive relief, usually incorporating the equitable balancing test. That is the remedy I would go for, which would mean that models might have to be retrained.
Injunctive relief only, not commercial penalties?
Damages potential as well. But statutory damages, I don't think so. Statutory damages can be quite distorting. They tend to be a honeypot for opportunistic lawyers, as well as genuinely aggrieved plaintiffs. So I would steer clear of statutory damages, but actual damage and injunctions, absolutely.
Mr. Rao, I'd be interested in your views on what a right of publicity might potentially do. I'd also be interested in hearing your thoughts on how we should be trying to balance respecting copyright through this or other means while incentivizing investment in AI and accelerating innovation in the United States.
Thank you for the question. So we talked about in our testimony similar to, but not exactly like a right of publicity. We've referred to as a federal anti-impersonation right. And the reason we thought about it from an anti-impersonation perspective is actually some of the same questions Professor Sag raised, which is we want to make sure Professor Sag himself does not have a deepfake made of him. So if you think about it as an impersonation, right, that would apply to everybody. And what we're really targeting there is we see the economic displacement that we've been talking about here, where an AI is trained on an artist and creates an output that is exactly like the artist, and they're getting displaced by that work. And copyright may not reach them. Like, that's been the question. So that's why we believe they do need this right, so they can go after these people who are impersonating work, whether that's likeness, whether that's style. And
he said style. That's as in meaning artistic style. I'm actually surprised to be hearing what this guy's saying right now. Let's let him finish.
And then the test would be something that we'd work out through 6 months of deliberation here in this body, exactly how you would decide that. But I think that's the right approach, because you want to focus on people who are intentionally impersonating someone in order to get some commercial benefit. And I think that will help clarify what harm we're trying to address.
Mr. Brooks, how do you think a federal anti-impersonation right?
By the way, that spells fair. Just want to make that clear. I know how Congress loves acronyms, yeah?
We are enthusiastic about acronyms. We actually are producing a Senate-only version of ChatGPT that only produces acronyms for bill names. Mr. Brooks, how do you think a federal publicity right or an anti-impersonation right, a federal requirement that there be opt-in only rather than opt-out, would impact the business model that you're currently representing?
So, Chair Coons, I think the actual instrument and the content of that instrument, I think we're relatively agnostic at this stage. As I said to Senator Klobuchar, it is important from our perspective that there are clear rules governing the use of likeness in an improper way. I think the important thing to stress there is that it is a use. And to some extent, we can't escape the fact that the determination of whether it's proper or improper will depend on the application, what the user does or does not do with that content downstream. And so...
I made a nuke. Hey, it really just depends what you're gonna do with it, buddy. I just made the nuke. I'm washing my hands of all that business, bro. If you want to take the nuke and drop it on the pond of the school, that's your business, and you're gonna be in trouble, not me. Not me.
So as I say, from our perspective, the lines in the sand between improper use of likeness, free experimentation with style, or other kinds of good or bad use of these tools aren't easy to draw. They're very fact sensitive. It may be appropriate for courts to determine that. But at a high level, as I say, I think there is a core of things around that improper use of likeness, especially voice likeness, that so there may be some legislative intervention there that makes sense and may have obligations, as I say, across the supply chain, across the ecosystem.
Mr. Halston, if I might, the Copyright Office recently issued guidance about human authorship being critical to any copyright protection. Is their guidance accessible enough, relevant? Did they strike the right balance? Should we be looking at a different policy in terms of how broadly copyright protection should reach when there is AI-assisted creativity as opposed to AI-generated?
I think the Copyright Office did a pretty good job. One can debate whether an AI component in a broader work should also be afforded some form of copyright. I think they landed in the right place, that it shouldn't. That copyright should only be afforded to human creation. So, for example, if you had an AI-generated song, well, if you had a song that was created by an artist and they used a piece of it was generative AI, there could be a copyright in that entire work, but the AI-generated portion would not be protectable. So if someone were to actually sample it or to lift it out and use it in another context, it would not be subject to copyright. I think they did a pretty good job trying to strike that balance.
In the conversation I had previously with Professor Sag, how do you feel about the scope of potential remedies if we were to craft an anti-impersonation statute?
I'm glad you asked me that question.
I thought you did.
Thank you. I think there should be a private right of action. I think that I think commerciality is, again, not always the proper standard here. I think that in some instances we've had artists who've been victim of deep fakes where the voice was appropriated and the lyric content was something the artist would never have said. And that's something that can have irreparable harm to their career and trying to explain that it wasn't them. Because this stuff is really good. Some of these AI generated things are really good.
Ms. Ortiz, last but not least, has in producing some of the interesting, engaging, powerful, inspiring content you've generated, have you ever relied on an AI tool to help you expand or produce some of the works you've worked on And what is your hope about what we might do going forward here in Congress in response to what we've heard from you about your concerns today?
I'm very happy you asked this question, Senator. So I have never really, I was curious very early on before I knew the extent of the exploitation of artists, very briefly used an AI to generate references, and I didn't enjoy it at all. I love every step of the process of being an artist. And ever since I found out, last August, September, of what actually went behind the scenes, I cannot use it. My peers refuse to use it. My industry is very clear that we do not want to exploit each other. And again, it's important to remember that these, models basically compete in our own markets. And this isn't something that's hypothetical. It has happened now with our own works. And one of the things that I would hope, would be kind of addressed here is that a lot of the solutions that have been proposed, or, basically, you cannot enact them unless you know what's in the data set. And for this, we need to ensure that there's clear transparency built from ground up. Like, no offense to some of the companies here, but if you don't know what exactly is in the data set, how do we know? How, as a licensor, know that my work is in the data set? And that, I feel like, it's one of the starting foundations for artists and other individuals as well to be able to gain consent, credit, and compensation. Thank you.
I just want to point out, I'm kind of covering this girl in the background here. Maybe you could see her, this Asian girl, was just nodding her head along because Carla is speaking the truth. It's plain and simple. I wish we could have heard more from her, but the fact that they didn't direct as many questions to her doesn't mean they don't want to hear from her. What that means is that what Carla said was compelling, and they took it to be something that they didn't really need to ask follow-up questions to. That's why they directed so many questions at the stability simp. I can't even think of a name for him. It's just disgusting human being on the left side of the desk, and the lawyer, and also the Universal Music Group lawyer, because they want to know, it's specifically in the case of stability sim, they're asking him so many questions because they're kind of grilling him. They don't need to grill Carla because they've taken on good faith that what she said not only makes sense, but is the truth, and the truth for more than just herself. Anyway.
Mr. Tillis, and before I just hand it over to you and then we're going to conclude, I just appreciate all of you taking the time and effort and helping educate us. You are literally training us as we try to produce some fidelity in our legislating work. Senator Tillis?
Yeah, to me, trying to figure out what may or may not be in the language model is a lot like taking roll in a dark classroom. I just don't understand how you would do it. So, I can see that we have to work at it. But I want to start, Mr. Brooks, by thanking you for being here. I think that anyone that's watching this needs to understand that this isn't unique to Stability AI. This is a broader set of issues that we have to deal with. And I appreciate the fact that you'd be willing to come here because you should expect that some of the concerns are that were going to be expressed to begin with. I have one question. The bad news for you all is that my staff are really excited about this. These are the questions that we're going to submit for the record, but rather than expect you all to respond to every one of them, you're welcome to do that. Your area of expertise, your priorities, just use that to guide you and get that information back for the record. But one of the ones I won't have to ask, because we ask it now, is a recent survey on how consumers view AI found that most consumers, nearly 80%, believe the use of AI should be explicitly disclosed. Now, in Vilnius, I happen to stay at a hotel that's called the Shakespeare Hotel, and every room was named after the greats. I don't see a day 100 years from now where those rooms are going to be named after great LLMs. And the reason for that is I think there's a natural cultural bias for rewarding the human beings who are truly the creators and the lifeblood, excuse me, of our creative community. So does anyone here disagree that a work that is derived even from, let's say, licensed content, that the consumer shouldn't know that this was created by a machine versus an original creative work by human beings? Anybody disagree with that, or maybe technical issues I shouldn't look at? No different than Mr. Rao, me. I use Photoshop. I could create Corvette cap with a skateboard or surfboard really quickly. No different than I want that, which is, again, based on prior creative work, somehow have disclosures. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think the question and that we thought about, we think it's definitely of interest to our creative customers to be able to show something is human created versus AI created. And in Adobe Firefly, it all comes out saying something is AI created. That's on by default, so you'll always know that it's AI created. The trick going forward, though, is we anticipate our AI features are our most popular features in Photoshop. So we expect going forward, most images are going to have a part that is AI and a part that is human, and you have to start thinking about what are you disclosing when you disclose that, right? The content credential we mentioned before that you could use a do not train tag for, or you could use for addressing deepfakes, also will record the human part versus the AI part. So you could think about using that as a disclosure, but I'm not sure over time people are going to be as interested as knowing the identity of the artist who created the work as opposed to like which part of it they did with AI. Which
That's fair. Professor Sa-
They didn't do any with AI because the people who use AI are not artists.
Did you have a comment?
Just to follow up on that, you also have to think that you're not just talking visual works here. Like, take the same thing with written works. Someone uses GPT to help smooth over their writing, refine something, explain it more clearly. There are some awkward line drawing questions. But the spirit of the disclosure requirement is correct. The implementation, I think, just will be difficult.
I agree. And Mr. Chair, I am checking the votes. I think it is probably time for us to wrap up the committee. I think you could see from this, just by the sheer number of members who came to the subcommittee, this is an area of interest and a priority for us. Mr. Chair, I have decided that maybe for the next hearing, it's going to take a little bit more tuning for me to get the answer, but I'm going to do with the, you know the song, Who Let the Dogs Out? I was thinking we'd set that to Don't Steal My IP, and I'll see if I can get that done. If you think about it, it'd be pretty snappy, but I'll work on that for those who may have to get a bigger room if people know about that in advance. But
we may end up doing this as a duet.
But I think this committee has demonstrated that we're very thoughtful and we are very diligent. And I, for one, could sit at that table and probably present the interest of either side of the spectrum, which is why I believe that we need legislative certainty. We need to learn. Like data privacy, data ownership in Europe, they don't always get it right in the first tranche, so we wouldn't necessarily lift something up and implement it here. We want to think it through and make sure it's something that scales properly. But this is clearly an area where I don't think anyone, they'd be hard-pressed to convince me that no action is required. And again, my bias on this committee from the beginning, having grown up in innovation, technological innovation, seeing the compelling numbers about how important it is to our economy and our culture, there's a lot of work to do, and I'm confident with the leadership of the chair, we're going to get work done. We look forward to your continued engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. I think it was Mr. Brooks, I may be wrong, who early on said that other technological developments, perhaps it was you, Professor, word processing didn't end authorship, smartphones didn't end photography, but they impacted them. They impacted them. And we need to closely and with some deliberation, realign what federal rights and protections there are, both to deal with things like deepfakes. Some argue that Shakespeare himself was a deepfake. To protect the rights of individuals, protect the rights of those who earn their living by being creative, to ensure that consumers understand what they're consuming, and to make sure that we're aligning with other countries that share our core values and our priority on a free market and the rights of individuals in contrast to other countries with other systems. So I'm grateful to all of you for testifying today, for taking your time and contributing to this. These are very challenging questions. Members can submit questions for the record for these witnesses if they were not able to attend. Questions for the record are due by 5 p.m. 1 week from today, July 19th. Again, thank you all. I look forward to your input as we try and craft a good legislative solution. With that, this hearing is adjourned.
Wow. Wow. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say that went pretty well. I did miss the first 10 minutes of that because I was on the government website when I should have just gone to YouTube, live and learn. So I'm actually going to just watch that. I believe we missed the chair's introductory comments. Apparently he mentioned Frank Sinatra, but overall, like, I'd say that went pretty well. I mean, Carla did a great job. The guy from Universal Music Group did a great job. Even the lawyer who I disliked, I think, made a couple of valid points. I think the only person who was pretty much talking out of his ass the entire time was the stability simp, whatever his name was. I think the Adobe guy, I think by and large, the foundation he built his argument off is very tenuous, although there is something to this. I have talked about the Adobe Firefly tools in some of my other videos. I'm not going to get into that right now, but let's just watch the intro again so we can see it. And I apologize for the kind of out of orderness. I'll probably edit out the beginning 10 minutes of this video where I'm sitting around eating, I think it was a ham sandwich. It's gone now, but where I was looking for it. And yeah, let's kind of watch that. So this is the very beginning, or is this the end? No, this is the very beginning. I guess everyone's still kind of getting their seats here. Oh, so it looks like I might not have missed too much. So, oh, here we go. Looks like we only missed a few minutes. Okay, here we go.
Pursuing this. If you like Ranking Member Tom Tillis and his staff for working with us on such a collaborative basis to put this hearing together. Welcome back from Vilnius. Senator Tillis was over at the NATO summit, and I'm thrilled he's able to join us, and we're able to do this hearing today. This is our second hearing in as many months on the intersection of artificial intelligence and intellectual property law and policy. You and your team have been great partners in pursuing this. If you will indulge me for a moment, Senator, before I proceed with my remarks, I'd like to ask that we play just a little clip of something to frame the challenges of this topic. Made with the permission of all the relevant rights holders.
Start spreading the news.
Okay, I can't play this because even though apparently this is going to be an AI thing, it'll get this video struck down. YouTube doesn't know that this is not really Frank Sinatra. Well, maybe we can just
AI's got something to say.
Okay,
it's coding it its own way.
You get it. I don't think we need to watch all of that. Basically, it's an AI Frank Sinatra deepfake. We've all seen it.
Between me and Frank Sinatra, but my voice came out so horribly flat. I didn't want to impose that on any of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your judgment.
Creating the song AI to the tune of New York, New York was great fun, and I appreciate my team that worked so hard on pulling that off. But the very existence of it highlights a couple of the core questions around copyright raised by generative artificial intelligence. ChatGPT wrote the lyrics following the style of New York, New York, although perhaps not quite as moving and inspiring as the original words to any but IP enthusiasts. Another generative AI tool was used to take Mr. Sinatra's recorded songs and his voice and his phrasing and his style and set that to music. So a couple of those core questions. Did ChatGPT infringe the copyright on New York, New York when it drafted lyrics representing its lyrical style? What about the AI tool that set those lyrics to music? Did either that tool or did I run afoul of Mr. Sinatra's rights by mimicking his voice? In my case, no, because we got specific approval. Or did I just use AI tools to enhance my own creativity? And if so, should this newly created song be entitled to copyright protection? These are just a few of the questions I hope we'll explore with our panel of talented and insightful witnesses as we consider the impact of artificial intelligence on copyright law and policy and the creative community. As we all know, AI is rapidly developing. Generative AI tools have brought many new people into the creative fold and have opened new avenues for innovation. People who may not have ever considered themselves creatives are now using these tools to produce new works of art. Artists themselves have used AI tools to enhance their own creativity. Paul McCartney recently made headlines announcing that AI helped create the very last Beatles song 50 years after the band broke up. As I've previewed, AI creates new copyright law issues, including whether using copyrighted content to train AI models is copyright infringement, whether AI-generated content should be given copyright protection, and many more. These questions are working their way through the courts. How the courts decide them and the decisions we make here in the Senate and in Congress about how to respect and reinforce existing copyright protections and works will have significant consequences, not just for the creative community, but our overall competitiveness as a country. While generative AI models are trained on copyrighted content, IP considerations haven't been included or sufficiently considered in proposed IP regulatory frameworks here in the U.S. In contrast, some of our competitors recognize IP policy as an important tool. The EU is currently planning to require AI companies to publish the copyrighted materials used in training models. The UK provides copyright protection for computer-generated works. These are just some initial concerns, and I think there are initial steps that we can take to ensure sustained U.S. leadership on artificial intelligence. First, it's critical to include IP considerations in any regulatory framework for artificial intelligence and to give our Copyright Office, in this framework, a seat at the table. We should also consider whether changes to our copyright laws or whole new protections like a federal right of publicity may be necessary to strike the right balance between creators' rights and AI's ability to enhance innovation and creativity. I'm excited to explore these issues today. We've got a great panel and great partner and great members of the committee. With Senator Tillis's cooperation, we've assembled this wonderful panel. I'll introduce them shortly, but first I'll turn it over to my ranking member, Senator Tom Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for everyone here. It's great to see the number of participants in the audience. It's even more amazing to see an equal number who would like to get in here. Who says AI and IP can't be sexy? But, you know, in all seriousness, I appreciate that we're having another hearing on the opportunity to highlight the importance of intellectual property when it comes to emerging technologies, and today we're talking about AI. During our last hearing, we really discussed the impact of AI on in a patent context, which explored ideas such as whether or not AI can be considered an inventor, and it cannot, and hopefully it will not in the future. But while many of these issues we discussed in the last hearing were perspective, the creative community is experiencing immediate and acute challenges due to the impact of generative AI in a copyright context. Strong, reliable, predictable IP rights are paramount to incentivizing U.S. innovation and creativity. It's this innovation and creativity that fuels growth of our country's prosperity and drives enormous economic growth. In fact, core copyright industries added $1.8 trillion of value to U.S. GDP, accounting for almost 8% of the U.S. economy. These copyright industries also employ 9.6 million American workers. The sales of major U.S. copyright products overseas in markets also constitute $230 billion and outpaced exports of other major U.S. industries. Advances in generative AI have raised new questions regarding how copyright principles such as authorship, infringement, and fair use will apply to content created or used by AI. we must not only consider how our current IP laws apply to the field of generative AI, but also what changes, if any, may be necessary to incentivize future AI innovators and creators. So, Chairman Coons, I'm happy to have this committee. I'll submit the remainder of my statement for the record. But for those of you who have watched our committee over the past several Congresses, where either Senator Coons and I were in ranking member or chairmanship, I think, if anything, I hope people understand that we're very thorough and we're very persistent in our approach, and we're inclusive. I've told everyone on this issue, whichever end of the spectrum you are, if you're at the table in the work groups, we're going to find a reasonable solution and compromises. If you're outside of the work group process and you're just taking shots at it, you may find yourself on the table from my perspective. So we encourage you to get to the table and make what we're doing better. The reason why I think it's so important, and I'm glad the IP subcommittee is leading on this in terms of formal hearings with the focus on potentially drafting legislation, is I think we run the risk of some in Congress who think AI is bad, that it's a threat to the future. I'm not in that camp. I think that AI is good. It's something that I first developed expertise in back in the late 80s. And have followed it ever since. It's a matter of getting the regulatory construct, the intellectual property constructs, all the other underlying policies that you need when a new, I think, in a positive term, disruptive technology hits the field. So the reason that we need to move forward, address potential concerns, is precisely because I want the United States to lead in innovation. And so much innovation is going to be premised on properly exploiting the capabilities responsibly. And that's what I hope we learn in this hearing and subsequent hearings and work groups. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for having the hearing.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. I'm now going to turn to our witness panel. Today we welcome 5 witnesses to testify about the intersection of artificial intelligence and copyright law. Our first witness is Mr. Ben Brooks, Head of Public Policy at Stability AI, a company that develops a range of AI models that help users generate images, text, audio, and video.
This is about where we started, so I'm going to shut it down. I'm sorry if my commentary was a little too much or I got a little spicy. Deal with it. I'm sorry. I'm absolutely not sorry at all. Sorry, Ben Brooks. You're the worst person. That's a pretty stiff competition field to be the worst person, but you're definitely, in the room with the squad, so to speak. And let me know in the comments below what the hell you guys thought about this. Going forward, I'll try to live stream these so we get the chat involved. But again, not my area of expertise. Didn't want to screw it up. And I wish you guys very good luck in the wars to come. Overall, I think this was positive. But I will talk to you guys very soon. Peace.